So, Mr. Prime Minister, we have a standing room only crowd. They're also out in the lobby. We're live streaming also in the lobby. So I think there's a lot of interest in hearing what you have to say today. So good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and I'm delighted you could join us here today. I'm honored to welcome Prime Minister of Greece, Kyriakos Mitsotakis. Mr. Prime Minister, a warm welcome and thank you for coming to the Atlantic Council. We're delighted you're starting your Washington agenda here with us before you meet with the IMF and with President Trump at the White House. It's an honor to host you here at our DC headquarters after you met with our International Advisory Board in September on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. The Prime Minister joins us this morning as part of the Future Europe Initiative's Leadership Series. In this series, we welcome key European heads of government, heads of state, ministers to discuss political developments in their home countries and across Europe, challenges facing the transatlantic community and opportunities for deeper engagement. This series advances the core mission of the Future Europe Initiative to promote leadership and strategies that shape and secure a strong transatlantic alliance for the future. The Atlantic Council is sometimes considered an American organization. It's really a transatlantic and a global organization that brings together friends and allies to shape the global future. Mr. Prime Minister, in your first 6 months in office, and what a 6 months it has been, you're pushing an ambitious agenda of structural reform of the economy, and investors are taking note, and we hope more and more U.S. investors will take more and more note. By the end of 2019, Greece's borrowing costs had fallen tremendously. Cuts on property taxes and corporate taxes are on the horizon, and unemployment has fallen to 18% with the influx of capital. This is an incredible turnaround from even 5 years ago when unemployment was hovering around 25% and the GDP deficit was at 5%. Greece is a country that spends 2% of its GDP on defense, so the NATO standard. It is a key strategic ally of the United States, and you have been a strong voice, Mr. Prime Minister, for NATO and European defense, leading the rest of member states by example. In that same vein, your commitment to reform and renewal in the European Union is vital, from pushing for Eurozone reform with the new Commission to standing behind North Macedonia and Albania as they seek to join the European Union. In December, just before the NATO leaders meeting in London, you rightly said, and I love quotes that just capture a moment. Quote, "We should not forget about Eurozone reform simply because we're not faced with a crisis. You build a roof when it's not raining." I think this is the exact attitude we should carry with us as we start this new year, which is already shaping up to be a complicated one. We face many challenges ahead: escalating conflicts and tensions in the Middle East, return to great power competition with China and Russia, and the immediate and global threat of climate change. And of course, the spread of information operations and rising authoritarianism targets the way of life that we've worked so hard as a transatlantic community to protect. Some of the problems in our paths are crises, but some of them have not yet spilled over. We have the opportunity to build the roof before the storm, to borrow your metaphor, and we know Greece will be key in this endeavor. The Atlantic Council itself has invested on Greece and in Greece when others were only looking and observing the crisis. We look to the future. Under your leadership, Greece is establishing itself as a pillar of stability in southeastern Europe, a dedicated EU member state, an esteemed NATO member, a key ally of the U.S. Washington and Athens now share an enduring common agenda of working together to bolster prosperity and security in Southeast Europe, including kickstarting bilateral economic ties and integrating the remainder of the Western Balkans in the transatlantic community, and that's very important. Much of that work has been undertaken by close friends of the Atlantic Council, Ambassador Jeff Pyatt, Assistant Secretary of State Phil Reeker, who are both here this morning, and it's wonderful to have you with us, gentlemen. Thank you, Ambassador Reeker, Ambassador Pyatt, for your dedication to the USGreek relationship. It's extremely encouraging to see that hard work paying off as it is. Through our colleagues at State, the administration, and Congress, the United States is by your side in this endeavor, Mr. Prime Minister. President Trump last month signed the East Med Act, an initiative to facilitate energy cooperation among the U.S., Israel, Greece, and Cyprus. And back in October, Secretary of State Pompeo traveled to Athens to update the Mutual Defense Cooperation Agreement. The Atlantic Council is also a friend here in Washington of Athens. Our Future Europe initiative, which organized this event, leads the charge by building relationships with your government and business leaders to encourage mutual economic, political, social growth and security. In 2019, we sent a high-level delegation to the Delphi Economic Forum in February, stopping in Athens for high-level meetings with local leaders and decision makers. Benjamin Haddad, the director of this initiative, and Damon Wilson, the executive president for programs and strategy, have spoken at events in Thessaloniki and Washington about Greece's vital strategic role in the East Med region and the broader transatlantic relationship. We've hosted 3 of your ministers in November for conversation on the future of Greek economic investment, including Minister Georgiadis, who has joined the Prime Minister this morning. Mr. Minister, welcome back. We have an excellent council team leading our work in Greece and both continents. We have members from our board of directors from Greece and International Advisory Board, where they provide valuable thought leadership and support for our work in Greece. And so even though I don't think they're here, I want to salute Board Member Harry Sakinis and International Advisory Board Member Dimitrios Papalexopoulos. We also have a standout non-resident senior fellow with the agreement, Katerina Soku, who is driving our work in DC and was instrumental in organizing the event today. So we've got a small village of our own people working on this relationship. We're thrilled to announce today, going beyond that through our Future Europe Initiative and Global Energy Center, led by Ambassador Richard Morningstar, the Council will partner with the American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce on an initiative monitoring the energy developments and political implications of the Southern Gas Corridor in the East Med region. The Adrian Arsh Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center has signed a letter of intent with the City of Athens and an MOU as part of their Cooler Cities Action Initiative, working toward 1 billion resilient people. So we're also working with Greece on this issue. Mr. Prime Minister, you've established your strength of conviction and iron will in a tumultuous 6 months for the transatlantic community, and we're honored you're here today to share your perspective on the role of Europe and the transatlantic partnership. With that, I'll turn this over to Damon Wilson, our Executive Vice President, and the Prime Minister for a discussion on the future of the U.S.-Greek relationship. But please join me again in giving a very warm welcome to the Prime Minister of Greece.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Mr. Prime Minister, let me echo Fred and welcome you here to the Atlantic Council. I want to welcome your entire delegation, all the ministers who have joined you, to underscore really, I think, the breadth of the agenda that we'll discuss in just a few minutes. And of course, Ambassador Lalakos, who has been such a great partner of ours here in Washington, as well as those who have come from the American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce, our newest partner in Greece. To all of our guests here and all of those watching live, I want to encourage you to join this conversation on USGreece, a vision for the new decade, by using the hashtag #StrongerWithAllies. Mr. Prime Minister, you're here almost 6 months to the date in your term. Exactly 6 months to the date in your new term. Tell us a little bit about what you hope to achieve with this visit to Washington. What are your objectives here?
Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words, Brad. Thank you very much for that introduction. Thank you to the Atlantic Council for its commitment to the transatlantic relationship and for the work that you've done in Greece. And I'm very happy that you're broadening the agenda of your interventions by looking at issues which are also very much at the center of our priorities. Issues such as climate change, resilient cities, are very much related to the new agenda that we want to pursue as the country is coming out of the crisis. I'm here literally 6 months to the day when we received a very clear mandate by the Greek people to change the country, to leave the crisis behind and to drive a path towards a sustainable and inclusive growth. And I think we're coming to Washington with a broad delegation at a time when there are already some very clear results in terms of us being able to actually implement our strategy. We're also coming at a time of great geopolitical turbulence, but also at a time when the Greek-American relationship is, in my mind, the best it has ever been. And it's an opportunity to take stock of what we have been able to achieve, but also to set a new sort of more ambitious target in terms of what we can achieve vis-a-vis our bilateral relationship, talking about, and I'm sure we'll discuss these issues, our strategic, our defense priorities, the breadth of our economic cooperation, where I think we can do much more, cooperation on energy, cooperation on education, cooperation on climate change. This is a very, very important relationship to Greece. It's also a very important relationship to the US, and I think it will be an opportunity in my discussions with President Trump to reaffirm this mutual commitment to a relationship that has strategic depth, and to look at how we can take it further. We've always been, but I think we have an additional reason to claim that in these turbulent times, I think we are very, very reliable and dependable partner of the United States in an admittedly complicated region.
Mr. Prime Minister, we'll unpack some of the issues you mentioned there, but when we began to put this together, talking to Ambassador Pyatt, Ambassador Lalakos, we talked about the theme, Greece is back. And so you're here in Washington after a decade of depression in a country that lost over a quarter of its output. Over 450,000 Greeks left the country to seek employment. Unemployment was over 27%, over 50% youth unemployment, 3 austerity programs. And yet the country's emerged from this with democracy and its institutions intact, its society coherent, cohesive. You're in budget surplus, restored growth. Extremists are actually in retreat. The center is in power, a sense of political stability and increase in confidence. You were remarkably elected on a platform, a clear platform of structural reforms for Greece, something that hadn't been popular in the past. How is that going? What have you been able to achieve so far in the first 6 months, and what comes next as you seek to transform the economy?
First of all, I think it's important to point out that our election was, I think, an important turning point after a decade of intense economic but also social crisis. Because at some point, Greeks, having experimented with populism in its leftist but also in its right-wing form, we should not forget that the previous government was a coalition government between a leftist radical party and a party that is clearly to the right of New Democracy. They clearly failed to deliver. So we made a very clear case to the Greek public that we need to change, we need to embrace reforms. We need to do reforms because they're good for the country and because we believe in them, not because they're imposed upon us by the IMF or by our European creditors. And we received a very strong mandate to push down that path. We're one of the very few governments in Europe today that has an absolute majority in parliament, which is a huge bonus. I can tell you, if you just look at how complicated coalition building has been in other European countries, this is a huge advantage for us to be able to take decisions very, very quickly and then implement them. And I think also at a time when Greek society is broadly in support of policies which were viewed with skepticism even a few years ago. So we have a mandate, we have a good team, we have the will to deliver, and this is exactly what we've done so far. We've passed 32 pieces of legislation in 6 months, including amending our constitution. The economy is reacting very positively. As Fred pointed out, our borrowing costs there are days when they're lower than Italy's. We've repaid the IMF. We've tapped the capital markets. We are able to deliver on a growth strategy that is actually making a real difference for people in the country. We've started lowering our taxes. We're lower taxes on real estate. We're lower taxes on corporation. Starting January 1st of this year. And I think there's a general sense in Greece that we are open for business. We're looking to aggressively attract foreign direct investment, and it's already beginning to happen. So if you look at our performance over the first 6 months, I think we have every reason to be pretty pleased with what we have achieved. There is always this advice that other heads of state and government gave me when I was in the opposition. They told me, make sure you do the reforms, very quickly. And then when you look at how other governments have performed, usually that is not the case. We're going against the trend. And we've also said that for 2020, we will continue with this aggressive reform agenda. I'm sure the economy is going to react very positively. I expect growth rates close to 3% for 2020. And this will give us also the breathing space to address some of the more complicated issues regarding reforms that take time to really show clear results, such as public administration, justice, or education.
Mr. Prime Minister, you used the adjective aggressive. You set some aggressive benchmarks of, I think by the end of 2023, 4% growth, 100 billion euros in new investment in Greece. But one of the things that you've made a point of pointing out is concern about what had been a straitjacket, if you will, of Greece's requirement, 3.5% of GDP surplus as a result of the austerity programs, and a desire to sort of renegotiate this. You'll see the IMF, you're talking to your European partners. How do you see the flexibility that you might have in making some of these decisions about investment going forward?
The 3.5% restriction on our primary surpluses is a policy that comes from a different era. It was agreed at a time when there were real concerns about our debt sustainability, but I think it was also a necessary instrument at a time when our creditors did not have enough trust in the Greek political elites to actually deliver reforms. The idea was very simple. We keep Greece on a very tight fiscal leash, because if we give them more fiscal space, they'll start doing the same things that brought the crisis about in the first place. I think we have every reason to argue that this is no longer the case today. So we need to change the 3.5% primary surpluses starting in 2021. This is exactly what I said when I first got elected. I said I don't want to change the surplus for the targets for 2019 or 2020. Why? Because I need time to establish my credibility. So we're starting this discussion in earnest with our creditors, with the Eurogroup. We will have the support of the IMF. I will see Mrs. Georgieva immediately after our discussion. The IMF has argued very convincingly why the primary surpluses need to be lowered, and I expect to have their support as we continue these discussions with our European partners. And it's also very important to point out that we want to use the additional fiscal space in order to further cut taxes and use only 20% of the additional fiscal space. So 80% will be directed towards further cutting taxes, and 20% will be used towards targeted social spending to address extreme inequality and extreme poverty in Greece. So I think the stage is set for us to make a convincing case why we need to change the primary surplus targets, because we need this additional fiscal space to really turbocharge the growth that is already being demonstrated in Greece today.
How do you see American companies factoring in? Your message in September when you were in the United States was beginning to lay out the case. Greece is open for business. You're reinforcing that now. We've certainly heard that from Ambassador Pyatt. But what do you see as the opportunities for increased US-Greek trade and investment?
Well, I think the opportunities are clearly numerous. And I am, when I looked at the foreign direct investment numbers, clearly the US is punching below its weight in terms of how many companies have actually invested in Greece. And we want to change that, and it's already beginning to change. You're all aware of the fact that we are trying to unblock the old airport project, the Hellenic project, and we've really worked very, very hard with our ministers to make sure that we remove all the unnecessary bureaucratic impediments in order for this investment to take place. We have 2 American companies bidding for the casino license. It's important that for the first time some serious money is going to be invested in this project by American companies. But really, the opportunities are numerous in various sectors. Just look at the sectors where Greece has a natural comparative advantage. Anything that surrounds tourism, real estate, renewable energy. Greece as a logistics center. Greece as a center for high-tech excellence. This is something that may surprise some of you, but Greece is a country that has excellent human capital. Highly trained engineers, and companies such as Cisco and Pfizer are already looking to set up research centers in Greece. So it's important to convince American companies to take a new look at this part of the world. To the extent that we have removed the political risk of the country, I think the case for investing in Greece really makes a lot of sense, and I would like to thank the ambassador for the work he has done, both Ambassador Payet and Ambassador Lalakos on our end. Have worked really very hard to improve the economic aspect of our relationship. So I'm looking for more U.S. investment in Greece, and I'm sure it will happen very soon.
The issue of U.S.-Greek relations, because you yourself said, and we've heard from Secretary Pompeo, that the United States and Greece have among the closest relationships they've had historically right now. It's a pretty significant statement. At a time of some divisions across the Atlantic, of some rhetorical food fights occasionally among transatlantic leaders, why are U.S.-Greek relations, how are they at a high point? We've heard American officials say, not for attribution, but that we've gotten the past era of instinctive and reflective anti-Americanism in Greece. We've gotten over that and have opened this new chapter. What has made that possible?
Well, first of all, it's important to point out that a country which was very anti-American during the 70s, the 80s, or the 90s, that's no longer the case. So people-to-people contacts have really strengthened the foundations of this relationship. On the political level, it's also important to point out that there is a cross-party consensus regarding the importance of this strategic relationship. Now, for the party I have the privilege of leading, this was pretty obvious. It was not necessarily obvious for the previous government, which made a 180 degrees turn in terms of their policies and actually supported the deepening of the U.S.-Greek relationship. And there are some clear and very important benchmarks one can point to. We've signed a new defense cooperation agreement that enhances U.S. presence on the ground. Our defense cooperation is clearly moving in the right direction. We have a big program to upgrade our F-16s. We're looking, and we will start the discussions to explore the possibility of Greece joining the F-35 program. This is an important priority for me and the government. Once the F-16 program is completed in 2024, we feel we will have the fiscal space, and hopefully our American friends can help us by taking into consideration the fact that we are not still in a situation where we can spend as much as we would like on our defense. But I think it's also related, the state of the relationship, to the fact that when you really look at the map of the Eastern Mediterranean and you look at the fundamental realignments, Greece is a country that has been a NATO member since the 50s, a member of the European Economic Community since 1979, a member of the Eurozone, a member of Schengen. We share the same values. We fought together in wars. We sometimes keep forgetting all that, but it is very important. So when you look at this part of the world, we are a very reliable partner. And of course, the whole concept of the trilateral frameworks of cooperation, Greece, Cyprus, Israel, Greece, Cyprus, Egypt, with the addition of the United States, gives a new impetus to the presence of the United States in the Eastern Mediterranean. I should also point out, you mentioned it in your introductory comments, that the East Med Act, which was signed into law by President Trump on December 20th is a milestone legislation that very clearly lays out why the Eastern Mediterranean is important for the United States, who the partners are, and how these partners should be supported given the context of a highly volatile region.
Let me ask first about NATO on the defense side, but then come to the East Med issue. You attended the London leaders meeting at a time when there were some pretty sharp words exchanged, whether between President Macron, President Erdogan, President Trump. And yet the security defense relationship between the United States and Greece is bedrock from Suda Bay to the new agreement. What was your sense of the state of the alliance coming out of your first leaders meeting in London? How does Greece see the role of the alliance, particularly given some of the uncertainty in your region, in the Eastern Med, with Turkey itself and with the Western Balkans?
I mean, the alliance continues to be the bedrock of the transatlantic relationship, and that is not going to change, regardless of the fact that Europe, probably through a coalition of the willing, is going to look to strengthen its own defense capabilities. So I've always been a big supporter of NATO, and I think the alliance today is as meaningful as it has ever been. Having said that, I made it very, very clear during my remarks that it is unacceptable within the context of an alliance to have one ally member clearly provoke another ally. I'm clearly referring to Turkey and the activities by President Erdogan, and that this is something which, within the context of an alliance, should not be brushed aside, because the general approach of NATO has always been, oh, okay, we have two ally members, they have their issues, let them sort it out. But I think we have a clear case to make that now the situation is rather different, and that we're faced with Turkey, which is behaving in an extremely aggressive manner, but at the same time it remains an ally member. So these issues at least should be raised and discussed within the alliance. They also have very clear security implications. I think it's very obvious also to the United States administration that one cannot sell F-35 airplanes to a country that is procuring at the same time S-400 anti-aircraft missile systems, that the two cannot go together. So I think also within the context of the relationship regarding the United States and Turkey, these are important points that were certainly raised by me during the NATO leaders meeting.
Turkey may come up again, but I want to pick up on the East Med Act and some of the issues related to that. Greece has already played a pretty fundamental role in diversifying Europe's energy supplies, whether through new LNG imports through Greece ports, the TAP pipeline, the interconnector with Bulgaria. It's quite significant. But you've just hosted in Athens Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, President Anastasiadis of Cyprus, to sign the East Med project, the idea of a pipeline that would bring Eastern Med gas to Europe. I don't think this is tomorrow, this is a bit off in the future, but talk a little bit about how you see your strategy in the Eastern Med on the energy side and the role the United States is playing in helping to realize that vision.
I think this is a very, very important angle of our relationship with the United States. For a long time, we have been talking, and it is certainly in the interest of Europe, but also in the interest of the United States, to diversify our energy sources. And Greece has been at the forefront of this effort, and we are actually in a position to deliver on our commitments. TAP is going to become operational within 2020. The IGB interconnector is being built. We are really looking to strengthen our ability to import LNG. We've expanded the LNG capacity of our main LNG terminal in Revithoussa outside Athens, but we're also looking to complete a floating storage and regasification unit, an FSRU, outside the port of Alexandroupoli. I consider this project absolutely critical for Greece. I've given it my full personal support. It will be an additional source, entry point for LNG also American LNG, into the European market. And of course, as you pointed out, we have also signed the EastMed pipeline, which is an ambitious long-term project that will bring gas from the Eastern Mediterranean into the European markets. This is an important project for Europe, not just for Greece. Eastern Mediterranean is the only proven source of natural gas, new proven source of natural gas that Europe has access to. For the next 30 years at least, natural gas is going to be the transition fuel that will allow us to move towards a carbon neutral Europe. This is also important for Greece and our energy transition. And I think the countries of the region have taken the important geopolitical decision that the best way to get this gas out of the region is through a pipeline that will go through Cyprus, Greece, end up in Italy. So this is an important statement of intent, and we're very, very happy that we signed the project in Athens a few days ago.
It seems as if some of your neighbors have also noticed this activity, and this agreement was preceded by a pretty remarkable agreement between Ankara and Tripoli, which also perhaps infringes on some Greek claims around Crete as a Turkish play in the Eastern Med. And tomorrow, I think many of you are aware that President Putin will be in Turkey to trumpet the opening of Turkstream. So how do you see your neighbors and these actions responding to what you've been doing with your Israeli and Cypriot and Egyptian counterparts?
Let me first of all point out, and I made this point also in my remarks during the EastMed ceremony, that we don't seek to exclude anyone from energy cooperation in the Eastern Mediterranean, provided they respect international law and play by the rules of the game. So this is not an agreement that goes against Turkey or any other country. We have a framework of cooperation of countries that think in the same way. Turkey clearly does not think along those lines. And I would be very, very happy if Turkey were to reconsider its overall approach. You mentioned the two agreements with Libya. As far as the agreement regarding the delimitation of maritime zones is concerned, it's clearly null and void, but it's also geographically ridiculous. You just need to look at the map to understand that there's no connection between Turkey and Libya. Of course, the agreement assumes that our islands, including our biggest island, Crete, does not have an exclusive economic zone, which goes against everything we know in international law. And it has the additional problem that it has not been ratified by the Libyan House of Representatives. So it's an agreement that clearly has no legal basis. We don't consider it to produce any legal ramifications vis-à-vis Turkey is concerned, but it is an indication of how Turkey, thinks in terms of the Eastern Mediterranean. We have our differences with Turkey, but at the same time, we're very open to keeping the channels of communication open. There is a political dialogue that is taking place between the Secretary Generals of our ministries. It will start again in a couple of days. And as far as our differences regarding the delimitation of maritime zones, which we consider to be our main difference with Turkey in the Aegean and in the Eastern Mediterranean, I've publicly stated that if we cannot sort out our differences, we're open to discuss going to The Hague and having the court decide on our behalf. But in order to reach which I think is a very fair and logical approach to solve our differences, assuming that we all believe in international law. But in order to get to that point, we need to refrain from any activities that clearly add degrees of escalation and regional tension. So I think we've been extremely reasonable in terms of addressing this situation. We'd also made it very, very clear that we will not accept any infringement upon Greece's sovereign rights within our exclusive economic zone.
Let me turn, if I might, to the Western Balkans. During As an opposition leader, you expressed opposition and skepticism about the Prespa agreement that resolved the name dispute between Athens and Skopje. And yet, as Prime Minister, you've been supportive of the aspirations of North Macedonia and Albania to begin EU accession talks. You've even described President Macron's decision to veto the opening of accession negotiations as a mistake. And you've pointed to perhaps the irony of a French president in the late 70s really standing by Greece at an early moment in its development to join the European Economic Community. How do you see the next steps here? What is Greece's role? Greece going to be with the vision of Thessaloniki, the vision of how the Western Balkans is integrated into the European Union? Is this going to be a stalled, perhaps longer-term project? Or do you see an ability to get to yes on opening negotiations sooner rather than later?
First of all, let me clarify that as the leader of the opposition, I did oppose the Prespa agreement for very, very specific reasons. And I also did everything I could within my capacity to make sure that this agreement was not ratified in Parliament. I also publicly stated that once the agreement is ratified, then there is very little we can actually do to change it, and that I have to respect it once I come into power. And this is exactly what I have done. We still have issues with the agreement, and we're working on them. We have issues, important issues regarding trademarks, regarding the ownership of what we consider to be a Greek brand, which is the Macedonian brand. We're helping our companies, making sure that they protect their trademarks, and we will be working in that direction, very, very systematically. At the same time, we've also publicly said that it is in our interest to anchor the Western Balkans to the European Union. And also, if we want to have, in terms of the bilateral relationship, if we also want to have leverage over our northern neighbor, in terms of making sure that our interests are fully taken into consideration, we need an accession process that is open. We don't need to slam the door shut into their face. So we supported the decision at the last council to give a date to both countries to start accession negotiations, and we're disappointed by the results. But also vis-à-vis Albania, we also made it very clear that also there we have very specific preconditions. The preconditions have to do with the fact that in Albania we have a national Greek minority, recognized national Greek minority, and the rights of the national Greek minority need to be respected, be it property rights, be it their ability to participate in the civic and economic life of the country. So I've also made it very clear to Prime Minister Rama that we support you, but we will not accept that the rights of the Greek minority are not fully protected. At the same time, when there was an earthquake in Albania, we were the first to send our special teams to help our neighboring country. We are by far the largest economy in the region. We're the oldest NATO member, the oldest member of the European Union. For 10 years, we were too focused on our internal problems. It's about time to return to the region with a forward-looking agenda and to punch above our weight, which is exactly what we try to do, not just in the region, but also in the discussions we have regarding the European Union. It was very frustrating for me to see past Greek leaders only talk about our own problems and only try to defend why Greece needed any support or assistance or bailout packages. I think we're leaving this period behind us for good. This is a new, very confident country that intends to play a role in the region and a role within Europe, because that's where we belong.
Do you feel you're making progress with in Paris with the French have put some proposals on the table? Yes. Is there a near-term pathway forward?
I think some progress has been made. We're looking at the process itself and whether we can make changes to the process. And hopefully, once we get to Zagreb in May, the French, but also the Dutch and the Danes will reconsider their position.
Let me pick up in some broader issues, strategic issues in the Middle East, China, before I turn to the audience for your questions. You're here at a tumultuous time in the wake of the drone strike that took out Soleimani in Baghdad, outside the Baghdad airport. This is dominating the discussion, the debate here. What comes next? What will be the Iranian moves? What's the U.S. strategy? Can you give us a little bit of perspective from Athens? Greece has historically had very strong ties throughout the Middle East. How are you seeing what's unfolding in Iraq and Iran? What does this mean for Greece? What are you bringing to Washington, to President Trump on this issue?
Well, first of all, we're allies with the U.S. So we stand by our allies through difficult times, and I understand this particular decision was a decision which was taken by taking into consideration what is the U.S. national interest, and we stand by that decision. At the same time, one needs to be fully aware of the fact that there is concern in the region, broader concern about a possible escalation, and I think efforts should be made. Now that a clear statement was made by the United States regarding the red lines that it is willing to draw to move towards moves that will de-escalate the overall tension. And I hope that this is a message that is received by everyone. Yes, we've had close ties with and we still have very close ties with the Arab world, and we consider ourselves an honest power broker in the region, but we don't forget who our allies are and where we belong geopolitically. So you were right to point out, and Fred pointed out in his introductory comments, that a lot of things that were taken as granted, as constants, are no longer there in this very complicated world. But what I can say is that the foundation of the post-World War II, global economic miracle, but also a miracle of peace and stability, was the transatlantic relationship. And that no matter what happens, the dialogues between Europe and the US need to be kept open. We may have our occasional disagreements, but one should not forget how important this relationship has been for everything that has happened since the end of the Second World War. So I'm always a big believer in the transatlantic relationship, and any organization such as yours that is looking at how to sort of reinvent the relationship in very complicated times will always play an important role in this context.
We have our work cut out for us, and one of the issues that obviously the transatlantic relationship is grappling with is the rise of China. China's played a significant role in Southeast Europe, in your country. You've had the opportunity to visit China as Prime Minister, where Greece was a showcase country at a trade expo in China. You've hosted President Xi in Athens, and I think we'll be going back to China for the 17+1. China's meeting with leaders from Southeast Europe, Eastern Europe, Northeastern Europe. How do you think about China in the context of the European Union, the transatlantic relationship, where there are great opportunities on the economic and trade front, where the Chinese have talked about Greece as a door to the rest of Europe, and yet at the same time, issues of how to manage solidarity across the Atlantic and dealing with China, and how to protect mitigate risk to the critical infrastructure investments, possible debt traps. How has this played out for you? How are you managing the opportunity and risk of China in Europe?
With flexibility and dexterity. What do I mean? What do I mean by that? We have an important economic relationship with China. They're big investors in our port. I think they've done a very good job in taking over a port that was essentially a non-player in the Mediterranean, and transforming it into the biggest port in the Mediterranean, creating lots of jobs in the process, and having very ambitious plans as to how to further strengthen Piraeus, and why not become the biggest port in Europe. You can't argue with geography. Piraeus is the natural entry point for goods coming from Asia, but also from Eastern Africa into the Central and Eastern European markets. That's not going to change. and it would be very naive for us not to take advantage of that important geopolitical position. I'm a big believer in free trade. If you are a big believer in free trade, then you also have to acknowledge the fact that you are in a position to facilitate free trade by virtue of your geography. Greece as a natural entry point, a logistics center for this part of the world. We're not overly exposed to Chinese investment. And of course, my goal is always to have foreign sources of capital be as diversified as possible. There will be new opportunities if you look at ports, new ports to be prioritized, looking for also American and European interest in participating in these investment opportunities. Greece and China also have important cultural ties. We're big civilizations. This is important within the context of the people-to-people narrative between our two countries. And of course, China is a very big market for Greek goods. So agreement signed between the European Union and China regarding the protection of geographical origins for agricultural products is particularly important for Greece. Are we concerned about critical infrastructure? Of course we are concerned. I can tell you that Greece is one of the few European countries that is, that as far as its core network is concerned regarding 4G and 5G, does not have any Chinese suppliers in its core network. So we're setting very clear benchmarks regarding the protection of our critical infrastructure, and on that issue, I am sure that we will take into very serious consideration, concerns voiced by the United States on these issues.
Mr. Prime Minister, let me open up to our audience and take a few questions at a time, with your permission. Why don't I start with these two over here, Kathy and this gentleman here, please. Please use the mic for our online audience.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Let me ask everyone to introduce themselves.
I'm Kathy Boffman-McLeod, and I lead the Adrian Arsh Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center here at the Atlantic Council. And Mr. Prime Minister, you mentioned climate change as one of the key issues you're facing. You've also talked about your new energy and climate strategy and attracting renewable energy companies, and at the same time have had heat and fires and the fire in Mati. And so I wondered if you could say a word or two about both the risks and the opportunities that climate change poses for Greece.
Let me go ahead and pick up this gentleman as well, please.
Hi, Prime Minister. Nicholas Veron here at the Peterson Institute for International Economics and also at Bruegel in Brussels. My question is about Andreas Georgiou, the former Greek chief statistician who has been prosecuted and persecuted over now nearly a decade. In a recent interview, you said that this matter had to be brought to an end and that it had damaged the reputation of Greece. My question is what efforts will your government do to restore the reputation of Greece on that matter and give proper tribute to the reputation of Andreas Georgiou? Thank you.
Why don't you take these two and then I'll come back to the audience.
Well, first of all, regarding climate change, we live with the implications of climate change. They're already there. They're affecting us. Be it droughts, be it wildfires, rising sea levels, impact on our biodiversity. This is something which is happening today. It's not going to happen in a few years. You just look at the horrible fires in Australia. The magnitude, the scale of destruction, it's mind-boggling. We're actually sending our elite teams to Australia today in response to a call for help made by the Australian government. But we've seen what these wildfires can actually do, and we need to protect ourselves the best possible way in terms of revamping our civil protection and making sure that we contain the damage. But of course, if we don't have an aggressive approach vis-a-vis climate change in general, things will get much worse. And I've been at the forefront of pushing for a new growth model that puts sustainability and addressing climate change at the very center of what we want to do with the country. we've put forward a very aggressive plan to move away from lignite, dirty coal, which is the most polluting form of fossil fuel. So we're shutting down all our lignite plants, the latest by 2028 and all but one by 2023. And of course, we're looking for European assistance to make sure that the one region of Greece which is very dependent on lignite mining is not faced with severe economic implications for this decision. That's why we've set up what we call a Just Transition Fund within the European Union to support regions that will be faced with the challenge of making this transition sooner rather than later. And of course, we have a vision of a country where renewable energy is going to be the main source of energy production. We have the advantage of having access to unlimited wind and in particular solar power, and we will very, very aggressively push towards that direction. At the same time, we're looking to partially privatize our distribution grids, because we need investments also in our grids to be able to support this this transition. So we have a very complete plan regarding energy transition, and of course a very clear vision of where we want to take the country going forward on this topic. And I've been a big supporter of the new Green Deal proposed by the new President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. It's an ambitious plan, but now we also need to make sure that we have the proper financing tools to implement it. One of the most difficult discussions at the European Union level we will have in 2020 regards the next European budget. And I've also made it very, very clear that you cannot implement these policies without the necessary financial tools. So, the big countries need to step up to the plate and accept the fact that we need a bigger budget at the European level if we want to do climate policy in the right way, and if at the same time we want to maintain agricultural policy and cohesion policy, which are the two non-negotiable pillars for many European countries as far as the European budget is concerned. So expect some interesting discussions regarding the European budget in 2020. But what we're doing is we're certainly stepping up to the plate. And by stepping up to the plate, we also publicly state our claim that we want to be one of the first countries to have access to the Just Transition Fund. Other countries tell us that they want to keep their coal mines open forever. I don't see any reason why they should benefit from a just transition mechanism if they still want to burn coal. But a country that is taking the bold decision to shut down all its coal mines by 2023 should be supported by the European Union as we manage that transition. Now, on the second question, I've spoken many times on this issue. I will not add anything beyond what I've said. It's an issue to be addressed by justice. I will repeat what I said. It will be very good if this issue finally comes to an end, and we give closure to a saga that, very honestly, has not done Greece, has not helped Greece's international reputation. But my job is not to intervene in any open judicial process, and I'm not going to do it now.
Let me take a couple more questions. This gentleman here has been waiting, so let's see if I can get the mic to him. And please, we'll come to the ambassador here in the front as well.
My name is Henri Baki. I'm from the Council on Foreign Relations and Lehigh University. My question is about the refugee crisis, or the potential refugee crisis that you may face as the situation in Idlib deteriorates and more refugees go to Turkey. President Erdogan has threatened to allow refugees to go essentially west to Europe. Is Greece ready, capable to handle these refugees? How would you stop them? You have all these islands which are easy to get to. So essentially, could you talk a little bit about the refugee crisis?
The key issue. Let me take this young woman here, and please then to the front row for the ambassador. Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. My name is Sofia Ikonomopoulou, and I work for General Electric. I wanted to know if you could address the issue of brain drain and the young Greeks who have left and what you're doing to bring them back. I have friends all over, and we're all kind of scattered everywhere, and it would be nice to hear what your plans are for the future. Thank you.
important question. Please, sir.
Damon, thank you very much. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for your remarks, and indeed congratulations on your remarkable successes. And for us, the Croats, at this moment, having just assumed the EU presidency, it's beautiful to see the year opening here in Washington with the European success story, which is Greece. Congratulations on that. My question also is related to the migration crisis, as aforementioned by the colleague. Clearly, this is something we face, and this is some of the critical issues we all have to deal with. We are feeling the pressure. Obviously, Greek is, in a sense, at the front line. What are and what may be the policies, the specific policies Greece wish to pursue, wish to enact as European policies in that regard? Because this is a clear case in which no single country can deal it alone. But again, it's great to have you here with us.
Thanks to the Ambassador of Croatia. We'll take those three, Mr. Prime Minister.
Well, let me first address the refugee question, because it is a very important one. And this is clearly a problem with a global, but also very clearly a European dimension. It cannot be solved by Greece alone. And I've been making the claim repeatedly that unless Europe gets its act together, there's going to be a new fault line that risks, ripping Europe apart on the migration issue, and that is something which we should not accept. You cannot have a Schengen zone of free movement of people, while at the same time not have common asylum policies and a coherent policy on how to protect your external borders. So I'm really looking forward to the European Commission presenting its new migration pact, its views on how we can reach the point of having a common asylum rules and common agreement on how we manage our external borders. It is very, very unfair to place all the burden on the countries that constitute the external border of the European Union, and then pretend as if this problem only relates to Italy or Greece or Spain or Cyprus. So we have not been very good at showing the necessary European solidarity on that front. Having said that, to get to the first question, I cannot afford, as Prime Minister of Greece, to wait for the European Union to come up with a coherent answer to this problem. So we need to look at the situation we're facing on the ground and make sure that we take all the necessary initiatives at our level. What have we done? We've changed our asylum policy, so we changed the asylum legislation, and as of January 1st, we've really tightened the process. We need the asylum applications to be processed much, much quicker than they have in the past. And for all of those whose application is declined, they need to be sent back to Turkey, according to the EU-Turkey statement, which is, in spite of its problems, it's still, the only coherent agreement that we have with Turkey, and we need to work upon it, we need to build upon it, and we need to improve it. At the same time, we're facing lots of pressures on our islands, so we have to take the decision, although that was not my first choice, to move some people, especially the more vulnerable people, off the islands and into the mainland. But at the same time, we're also increasing the capacity of the islands to welcome refugees and migrants by building new facilities where we will monitor who comes in and who comes out. We're looking at the role of NGOs. Most of the NGOs have been very supportive in terms of what we do, but also some of them have not been particularly supportive and sort of are undermining, the policies implemented by the Greek government. And of course, we're also strengthening our Coast Guard, and the Greek Coast Guard is doing a fantastic job in a very, very difficult situation in protecting our borders, but also in saving lives at sea. So we're adding additional boats, and we're strengthening our presence on the frontier. And we make it very, very clear that our Coast Guard will save anyone who is at risk of drowning at sea, but we're not a welcoming committee. We're not a tourist agency. The job of the Coast Guard is to protect the borders of the country. And I've made that very, very clear. And I'm also sending a very clear signal to the smugglers and to those who take advantage of the pain and suffering of these people. This is a different ball game. Starting, the beginning of this year, if you send people to Greece who do not have refugee status, be assured that these people will be sent back. So you're essentially wasting your money. I'm telling to the people who actually pay the smugglers to come to Greece, knowing that they don't have refugee status. We will do everything in our capacity to send them back to Turkey. Now, to the question which is very dear to my heart, and thank you very much for asking this question regarding brain drain. 450,000 approximately young Greeks left the country during the crisis in search for better jobs or in search for jobs abroad. And it was very painful. Very painful for the people who had to leave. Of course, there are always people who choose to leave. And in a globalized world, that's good. But there are lots of people who had to leave because they couldn't find a job in Greece. The brain drain needs to be reversed. 2 points on how this could happen. First of all, the brain drain will be reversed once we have more jobs, better paying jobs, and more opportunities in Greece. You work for GE. I'm sure you would be happy to return to Greece provided that Greece offers you a decent, good paying job. So we need jobs, and we also need to lower taxation and social security contributions on higher incomes, because a lot of these jobs are good paying jobs which were massacred by the policies of the previous government in terms of taxation and social security contributions. So my commitment has been that once I gain additional fiscal space, and I will be able to do that in 2020, that we will start reducing what we call the solidarity surcharge, which was another additional tax imposed in particular on high income earners. And by revamping our social security system, we will also reduce social security contributions for employees like yourself who'd be looking to come back to Greece to find a job. The other option which is open now in Greece, which is very interesting, is a career in entrepreneurship. One of the most fascinating things that happened during the crisis was this emergence of a new entrepreneurial culture where young Greeks suddenly realized that at a time when they could no longer get a job with the state and bang on the doors of a politician to help them through the old traditional rules of clientelistic and patronage politics, starting a business makes lots of sense. So we've seen a lot of interest in people setting up their own companies with a vibrant startup culture in Greece. We're doing everything in our capacity to support it. And of course, for those people who have succeeded abroad, this is a point I always make to the, especially to the vibrant Greek American community here. Why have you succeeded here? Because you have a culture of free entrepreneurship, relatively low taxes, and regulation which is not too intrusive. We want to replicate the same culture in Greece. The other aspect which I consider very important, which is particularly relevant to your generation, is the fact that we finally succeeded in giving you the right to vote from where you actually live. And that is very, very important because it connects the diaspora with Greece. We have not been able to do it to the extent that we wanted, but because of necessary compromises, we had to get to a supermajority of 200 MPs in order to introduce this legislation. It's a constitutional constraint which we have, but what we have managed to legislate covers the entire brain gain generation. So you'll be able to vote from where you actually live without having to return to Greece to do so. This will increase, I think, the level of political participation. And finally, you will return to Greece not just when you get a good job, but also when you really believe that the country has turned the corner. So there's a case to be made about the long-term prospects of the country. No one, myself, I had made this decision in '97 to return. It was not just about the job. It was about my belief that the country was moving in the right direction and that we've left the crisis behind us for good. Nobody in the right frame of mind would return to Greece only to believe that they will find themselves in the situation where they would have to leave again after a couple of years. So that's why I insist in all of us sharing the narrative that we've actually turned the corner, that we left the crisis behind us for good, and that the better years are ahead of us in the long term, not just in the short term. And that, I think, will give us the possibility to to attract talented people who have left, have them return to Greece. I would also stress here one aspect which I didn't touch upon, and that is the fantastic work that we're doing in education and research and development. We're opening up new partnerships, educational partnerships with top American universities, creating new opportunities for research in Greece. We have all the abilities to make Greece a regional educational center. For the first time, our Greek public universities are offering English-speaking courses in areas where I think everyone would be excited to study in Greece, classics, archaeology, history, yet these courses were never offered. So there's a small revolution taking place also within our universities, and that I think is also going to be particularly important to your generation.
Mr. Prime Minister, this is an optimistic note to end on. So before we conclude, let me just say two quick things. I think you've made a compelling case that Greece has turned the corner. I'm going to ask that everybody remain seated when the Prime Minister leaves with his delegation. But I want to just close by saying we've had a very measured conversation today, a very sober, serious conversation about important issues. And yet it's against the backdrop, as Fred began with, of really turbulent, sometimes chaotic times. And I think your leadership, Mr. Prime Minister, has been one of reassurance. It's making the case of Greece having turned the corner. And it's quite remarkable against the context, as you yourself mentioned, of backlashes in democracies all across the West. And yet you've had a sweeping victory at the ballot box on a platform of structural reform and political stability. And I think we want to thank you here at the Atlantic Council and with our family for being a champion of the U.S.-Greek relationship. And for our part at the Atlantic Council, we will be a champion of building and bolstering that relationship for the future. Please join me in thanking the Prime Minister for your remarks today and wishing you luck on your visit. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for a remarkable conversation. Let me ask if you remain, and the Prime Minister will exit here through the side.